Get started. I'm sure more people will join in the next couple of minutes. So my name is David Bartel, and I am the Development Chair for the SEG Foundation. I want to welcome you here to our SEG Foundation Virtual Donor event. We're going to feature our scholarship, what's happening with our Scholarship Committee. But first, we want to have a few comments about what else is happening around SEG. So Katie, if you could put up the slideshow, please. And go ahead to the next one. So I'm sure everybody's interested in where we were with the annual meeting. We had about 4,000 attendees this year to the annual meeting, which of course was all virtual. You know, it really, actually it's a kind of a smaller number than I might have expected. Of course, obviously a lot smaller than our previous in-person meetings, especially in Houston, but I think it's great. We had almost 4,000 attendees and 82 exhibitors there. So I'm going to go to the next slide, please. There was over 1,200 abstracts submitted, 764 of which were accepted for presentation. The average attendee enrollment at the technical sessions of being 345, that's a good number, considering, you know, that was probably more than many of the meeting rooms we might have had there in the Houston Convention Center would have held. And then all the post-convention workshops as well. So remember that all of the, you know, the post-convention workshops were rolled into the registration. Plus, you could actually go back and view some of the technical sessions later on for 30 days afterwards. So you really had the opportunity to see everything at the annual meeting, even if some of your favorite talks were double booked. Next slide, please. So looking at a survey of the audience, most of the people who answered the survey definitely thought that the annual meeting was important for performing the job and helping to establish contacts in the industry. These were our experienced geophysicists for the most part, and really also working worldwide. So the usefulness of the annual meeting certainly hasn't gone away. People did attend, and we're hoping that it'll be even better next year. We have over 232 active student chapters around the world. This year, the most improved chapter was Universidad Industrial de Santander in Colombia, and the best student chapter was Uppsala University in Sweden. Peter Duncan was able to pull off a virtual Challenge Bowl World Finals this year by doing some online gaming software. First place was University of Toronto, and second place was University of Naples. So it's a great feat to be able to pull that off and bring something together where the students really enjoy that, and I've always enjoyed going to those world finals and seeing the students. And then we were able to make sure that using the travel grants to make sure some of the students were able to attend the meeting, even though it was a virtual meeting. Next one. We'll hear a lot more about scholarships here in a few minutes. But we awarded this year 124 scholarships, representing about $322,000. Our field camp grants, they did grant 16 field camp grants this year, but only 9 were actually able to be held. And I know some of them were delayed and it's still able to get held. There was one, most of these I think happened in Europe, the ones that were able to get done, even if they happened a little bit later, but everybody managed to do it safely. The SEG Chevron Student Leadership Symposium did occur around the annual meeting, kind of right before the annual meeting and around it. There was 54 students participated. Having kind of participated in that and running that this year I think it was very successful. The students were really excited. They were really engaged in it. And I'll tell you, we had time zones all the way starting in New Zealand around the world to Hawaii, all logging in at the same time. The students were highly engaged. Even if they had to stay up late or get up early, they wanted to be online. The summer research workshops did not occur, but we did offer registration to some other workshops or to the annual meeting to be able to get student participation. Next, please. Yeah. So Geoscientists Without Borders was one of our more impacted projects, right? Because most of the project leaders couldn't go out and get their projects done. We did hear, if you recall, in July, we had another donor event where we heard from about the project in Myanmar, and they were actually, while they weren't able to travel out there to look at the instruments and download data, they taught the local geophysicists on how to do that, so they were still able to collect data. But what we've done is to extend the grants, right? So people can get their projects done. It might just start a little bit later. And finally, here in the second half of the year, they were able to accept more applications and approve more projects. So hopefully next year, these projects will be able to start up and we can engage in this wonderful humanitarian work. Our distinguished and honorary lecture programs obviously still went on. A few of the lectures got in before the travel restrictions really stopped all of that. And then they went to virtual. So each of the lectures held at least 2 virtual lectures to be able to accommodate different time zones, having about 8,000 total attendees, which is a great number. Still miss the in-person part, but at least we're able to get the word out about some of the more recent developments in geophysics. The distinguished instructor short course definitely was changed because that was supposed to start in about March and didn't occur at all until we got to the annual meeting. And it was great that Dave Monk gave a great disc in October, right at the end of the annual meeting, 2 mornings back to back. And not only, of course, could the attendees review the discourse later, but Dave also took the time to answer additional questions that were brought up during the course and then also posted those online. So that really helped out, I think, the learning in that particular course. The Evolve program was already virtual for the most part. So it really didn't have to change much, except that the students didn't get to travel to the annual meeting to make their final presentations. But a lot of that was already designed by Mike Forrest, Alan Bertain, and Arthur Chang to be a largely virtual presentation and mentoring events. So they had 28 teams this last year in 2020 with 161 participants, a wonderful program. And lastly here, it's our donors, right? And you guys are all of our great supporters here of the SEG Foundation. We have over 215 currently trustee associates, and 23 of those are sustaining trustee associates, meaning they're committing annually to additional giving to help the SEG Foundation do its work. And then we have our other donor levels, High Velocity and Doodlebugger. And then we have 76 donors who have given to very specific programs. And we appreciate all your support for helping out the SEG Foundation. And remember that web address, www.donateseg.org. And now we'll get on to our program. I'd like to introduce Dr. Esther Babcock, who's the chair of the Scholarship Committee. Esther earned her PhD from Boise State University. But prior to that, she was in the US Air Force as an A-10 pilot officer. So her geophysical work has concentrated on near surface investigations, largely around geotechnical and environmental applications, and specializing in ground penetrating radar and electrical methods. That certainly has gotten her a wealth of field experience all the way from Alaska to Africa and from Antarctica to Canada. So now I'd like to turn it over to Esther to give us a background on how the Scholarship Committee does its work and what have been the results here of the Scholarship Committee. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you for the introduction, David. I'll have Katie put up my slides. I'm unfortunately dealing with very ill-timed internet issues today. So as far as I can tell, my camera's not working either. And for that, I apologize. Problems always happen at the worst times. I can see Linda laughing. Yes, it's true. As was mentioned,
your camera's working. We can see you.
Oh, it is. Okay, great. Katie, can you put up the slide? Excellent. Thank you. Okay, we can start on that slide. As was mentioned, I'm the chair of the Scholarship Committee, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about some of the work that the committee does. Fundamentally, I think of the Scholarship Committee as a way for me and the other professionals on the board to give back to the geophysical community. When I was a student, I received this scholarship twice. And so after that, my scholarship advisor asked me to take his place on the board, kind of roped me into that. But I've been on the committee for 7 years now. So I've seen it from both sides of the fence, if you will. Next slide, please, Katie. The number of students that this scholarship impacts is pretty incredible. I look at these students as the future generation of geophysicists and our future colleagues and peers contributing to all of the work that we do. This slide and the two after this will show a 3-year look back on some statistics for the scholarship, and you can see the legends underneath the bars there. In this slide, you see the number of applications broken down into North American and non-North American, with the recipients in those same categories shown in green just to the right for 2018-19, 2019-20, and 2020-2021. You can see that there's roughly about a 25% dispersal rate. So for the applicants, that's the 1 in 4 chance mostly of receiving funding. That statistic is pretty amazing, and of course only made possible by generous donations. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down the numbers a little bit more into different categories within North American applications and recipients. So the Scholarship Committee views the scholarship applications by status, such as undergraduate and graduate applications. And you see that there is a distribution that's skewed within each of those categories. So for example, not very many freshmen, 5 out of 72 in 2018, 2019, received a scholarship, but quite a few more in the graduate status in North America. I look at this distribution as reflecting a continued commitment as a student progresses in their career. So for example, a freshman, in my opinion, doesn't really know what they want to do with their lives, if you will, but a graduate student who's pursued geophysics all along the way is probably quite committed by that point. And so to me, this increasing percentage chance of receiving a scholarship as you age in your student career makes sense from a merit perspective. Next slide, please. And so here we have the numbers broken down into available, blue, and awarded, green. Same 3 years look back. And you can see there's quite a decline for 2020, 2021, but I think we all understand what's happening there. And for these other years, and the average being close to $400,000 to $500,000, it's quite incredible that we're able to provide funding, that amount of funding for students within the geophysics discipline. And I think that's quite a strong contribution to this next generation of professionals. Next slide, please. From an individual perspective, awards range from a low of $500 for a minimum amount to a historic high of $10,000. And that's a significant amount for a student in North America or outside North America, with a median that you can see there. Next slide. For those of us in the committee, there's 8 members. As I think I said in the beginning, there's an 8-year commitment, 7 years as you spend within the board, and then the final years, the chair of the board being able to apply the knowledge that you've gained along the way. I have each of my fellow committee members listed here, and I'd like to just take that moment to recognize everyone's continued hard work and the dedication and commitment it requires to sign up for an 8-year commitment. But it can be quite time intensive, especially in the spring, and I'll review that. You can see that the distribution is skewed towards oil and gas industry, as we would expect, being a major part of SEG and the geophysical industry. And then we also generally have representatives from the academic sector, as you can see from Oklahoma State here. And then also Adam Mangel and I are near surface geophysicists. I think that's because I am a near surface geophysicist, I think that's an important part of the community. So many thanks to my colleagues here who will continue their service on the board after I depart in 2021. Next slide, please. Many thanks to all the SEG staff. Those of us on the board are volunteers, and we're trying to manage that in conjunction with our primary commitments to our careers. And so without the SEG staff, we would be completely lost. Linda, Mallory, Katie, I know you're all on the call, and I really want to thank you. It's been extremely terrific working with you, and we really couldn't, we would all be completely lost without you, to put it mildly. The scholarships wouldn't happen. So thank you. Next slide, please. Our annual tasks within the committee, I've broken down here from a calendar year, but really in my mind that skews, kind of divides after the forced ranking and the consensus meeting, which is May, June. But I'll run through it in a calendar year perspective. So in January, we contact the students. I'll talk a little bit about the student assignments later, and remind them, stay in touch with them basically throughout the academic year. Student reports are due in February for those students that are recipients. And then in March, we receive the scholarship applications. In those 3 months, there's a lot of work going on with the SEG, Linda and Mallory and Katie to actually make that happen. So we just get a nice tidy packet of several hundred applications to review. So thanks to them for organizing it. And then April and May is dedicated to the committee reviewing applications, which takes a lot of time, if you can imagine receiving all those applications and having to pour through them. And I think all of those of us on the board feel a responsibility to make sure that the people who have the merit are receiving the scholarships. And so that requires some careful thought. Then in end of May or beginning of June, the forced ranking occurs. That's the responsibility of the SEG staff and the committee chair. So this will be my year working on that. And then we have a consensus meeting with the committee, which traditionally has been one full day in person with those people that are located in Houston and other people calling in. Of course, this year it was broken down into, well, this year, of course, it was not in person. And we also broke it down into 2 half days to make a 10 or so hours of talking on the phone remotely a little bit more bearable. I think that was an effective approach. In August and September, the award letters go out, and then students that are recipients of the scholarship receive a board member to act as their contact and sort of a mentor, although I don't think we're using that exact word. And then in October, there's a fall committee meeting where we discuss what went well and what didn't go well. And then throughout that, you're communicating with your award recipients. That's a breakdown of what we do annually. Next slide, please. The fall committee meeting after the consensus meeting is, as I said, generally a time to review what went well or what didn't go well. We discussed changes to the application process. One thing that we've changed in the past year or 2 years is that students now self-select for restricted scholarships. So there's a narrow list or narrow requirement. And so previously, the committee chair poured through all the applications to identify those that could receive the scholarship. That takes quite a bit of time. So now students answer questions as to whether they are available or whether that's applicable to them. And then, of course, that's examined by the SEG staff and by the board to make sure that's accurate. But that certainly has saved a lot of time, I think, in my opinion. And then we have a requirement for students to get letters of recommendations from their professors or teachers. And we changed the percentage breakdown that professors could pick, for example, if a student's in the top 5% or top 1%. And so I think that's narrowed the field a little bit. And at least in this last round, I thought that was helpful for me personally, being able to discriminate between students that are close and whether someone should be in the top 5 or the top 10, for example. And then also changes to the application criteria have been pretty important. For freshmen specifically, we typically received an inundation of freshman applications, many of which were perhaps not narrowly tied to geophysics or tied to geophysics. And so we've narrowed that quite a bit. And this past year, there are many fewer freshman applications, and I think that was a good outcome. And then also what even outside freshmen and graduate and undergraduate students, what majors will be considered within the scope and intent of the scholarship. For example, we get physics majors, earth science majors, mathematicians, computer science, geophysicists, geologists, all of which could have contributions to the geophysical community. But when people outside the geophysics major are applying, I feel personally that requires a little bit deeper look into what exactly they are doing within geology, or what exactly they are doing within physics or math, for example. And then this year we eliminated the international freshman category just to lack of qualified applicants in the past few years. And also we have discussed, and all these discussions are ongoing and continued discussions amongst the board. I feel it's really helpful to have the diversity on the board that I mentioned. We have oil and the breakdown between oil and gas and other geophysicists, because there's always discussions about different people value different items in these lists and qualifications. And I feel it's really helpful to be able to have discussions about all these. And the process has certainly not been static during my time on the board. It's certainly evolved, and these are some of the examples of that. Changes to the award criteria. For example, we've discussed whether repeat scholarship winners should be prioritized or not, broken out a little differently just than by merit. So for example, if a repeat applicant who's received a scholarship has fallen somewhat in the merit standings, should he be prioritized because that person has previously received it or not? And some of us have different opinions on that. So that's an ongoing debate every year within the scope of the consensus meeting. Next slide. Every year after the scholarships are awarded, the students are assigned to each of the 8 committee members. So usually we get about 20 or so students with whom to communicate and to answer any questions they have about the scholarship process, the scholarship itself. Obviously, they can also talk to the SEG staff as another resource, and general questions about their career, their work. I like to know what my students are doing just for interest's sake and to try to build a relationship with them. So I try to stay on top of what research they're doing and what their interests are within geophysics. Sometimes this can get a little bit weighty from a time commitment. We are all burned out on email, especially with COVID. And so having another 20 emails to answer over some period of time can really sometimes, mentally for me at least, emails are an overload right now. But regardless, emails are generally sent on a repetitive basis just to try to keep in touch with the students as much as possible. And my students, everyone's students, are free to reach out at any time, of course, if they have needs or problems or questions. And then that happens more with certain students than with other students. And in my mind, that plays a part during award decisions. If I don't hear from a student at all for an entire year and they've received the scholarship, to me, that says they're not really interested in the process or being part of the community, which is part of how I look at this scholarship, is grooming and helping the next part of the geophysical community. And then oftentimes the awardees are assigned the same committee member as they progress. So for example, I've had one student since she was a freshman, and she's now getting ready to finish up her PhD. And so that's pretty amazing from my perspective, just to be able to follow along with an exceptional student and see her grow and get internships and do research and get a PhD spot and really be doing outstanding throughout her career. So it's pretty rewarding. Next slide, please. So in the midst of this, of course, we have the annual rankings before we get student assignments each year. This is definitely the most time-intensive part of the job. As I mentioned, several hundred applications, and probably the most important. So there really is an intensive time commitment here to go through all of those applications. It takes a while, and we are all busy, and so it's definitely not insignificant. Each committee member is free to follow their own system and choose their own preferences and decide their own categories and schemes for ranking. And we trust that everyone is doing the best job that they can. Obviously, it's a difficult process. And then there's a forced ranking compiled from the list of everyone's individual rankings. So that forced ranking generally takes into account the median of each person's ranking, perhaps dropping the high and low from that, so that we can compile an ordered list from 1 to whatever in merit order of the applicants within each separate category. And generally, after we have those spreadsheets, there's some cutoff set for how many awards are given within a category. There's a big red bar on the spreadsheet at some point. So for example, we like to stay in the top 20% of the category for awards as a general rule of thumb, depending on how many applicants there are, how much money there is, obviously, because that's a limiting factor. And then as required for special categories or restricted scholarships, because as I mentioned, for some of these narrowly restricted scholarships, that applicant may not and often does not fall in the top 20%. So then there's a discussion about, should this scholarship or does this scholarship need to be awarded, or should it be awarded to a lower ranking candidate based on the fact that they qualify for a restricted scholarship. So that's an ongoing discussion. Next slide, please. And then the consensus meeting, after we have that forced ranking spreadsheet, everyone reviews that. And there's some more work that I will be learning about as the chair that happens between the chair and the SEG staff to review that and review the restricted scholarships. Linda's smiling, yes, more work. And then there's a meeting, typically one full day, but this past year, as I mentioned, we broke it down into 2 days because of the requirement that this not be in person. And there's a lot of discussion that happens during this meeting. So now we have the forced ranking list and everyone has their different opinions and everyone has students that they think should be higher or lower on the list. And then also each committee member has their students that they've been assigned and that they've worked with for the past year. So we review, each committee member has a chance to talk about their specific students and how they feel about that student's progress and that student's repeat application and their status. So there's a lot of discussion about all the applicants and all the scholarships that are available, and then the restricted scholarships that are available with the students that are fall within those categories. Next slide. So in summary, I'll talk about the challenges, the successes, and our continued needs. So one of the challenges is communication during the annual consensus meeting, whether it's in person and a few people calling in, because then there's it's often hard to keep up with the in-person discussion if you're calling in remotely, or when everyone's calling in and we're all trying to keep up remotely with the discussion and which student we're talking about. Communication is one of life's grand challenges, but it definitely rears its head in this environment as well. And then creating time for the commitment. We all, and I know all of you on this call understand commitments and work and how to balance all the things that we want to do with our professional and personal lives. And so creating time, setting aside time in the spring, especially for reviewing those scholarship applications, means sacrificing a few weekends of time that you would be doing something else in order to review these applications. And so that's something that everyone who signs up for the committee is aware of and is made aware of, and definitely feels that time commitment. And then I think one of the big challenges are, as I've mentioned a few times so far, is the heavily restricted scholarships. So if there's no eligible applicants, that leaves money on the table, or if there are applicants that are very low ranking but fit within that category, is it the wishes of the donor that the scholarship be awarded in spite of or despite the merit-based ranking of the student. So this is the most difficult part, I think, of the annual consensus, or annual consensus meeting, is these heavily restricted scholarships and where those candidates potentially fall along the final rank ordered list. So those are a few of the challenges. Successes, as I've mentioned during this call, we have the opportunity to make the difference in lives of students across the globe, within North America, outside North America. I've had the pleasure of having several non-North American recipients within my body of students that I talk to. And I really do think of this scholarship as the opportunity for the SEG, the geophysical community, for all of us, for all of you to help the next generation of geoscientists and professionals that are coming in to be our peers, in some cases to follow in our shoes, and to continue the body of research and work that the geophysical community does that supports so many aspects of life on this planet, whether non-geophysicists realize it or not. So it's really an incredible way to make a difference and to foster the next generation of geoscientists. Since 1956, the Scholarship Committee has provided distributed almost $11 million in scholarship awards. That's an incredible number, incredible amount of money. And if you think about the difference that must have made, and that difference that made in my life when I was a student, and the difference that's made in so many lives throughout since 1956, it really is incredible. And I hope that this Scholarship Committee is able to continue for many, many more years with this endeavor. Some of the needs that I see, of course, I'll drop to the bottom bullet: continued funding. There's no way that this can continue without generous donations from people, from geoscientists, from geophysicists, from those of us in the community, to make this possible, to continue this mentorship and development of students and the next generation. Also, one thing that I am seeing and that Mallory has worked on is getting statistics to assess how successful the program is in retaining these students. So I look at this scholarship as hopefully a means to not just make a difference in the students' lives currently, but also to foster their development within the SEG and within as a professional commitment to the professional society and to the industry and to geophysics. And so I personally would like to know how many of these geophysical student recipients have continued to be active within the SEG committee throughout the years. There are many categories and ways that one could break down those statistics in order to see if there's more successful ways to give out the scholarship. For example, is it better to have repeat recipients and continue to foster someone's development all along the way, or is it better to cast a wider net and specifically, for a drastic example, not have any repeat recipients so that you can impact as many diverse students as possible? So two kind of ends of the spectrum there that we can think about, and hopefully these types of statistical analyses will help us answer some of those questions. Next slide, please. I am happy to have given this presentation to you all today, and hopefully you've learned a lot about the committee and how the committee works and how the scholarship distributions happen, and I would be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Esther. Yeah, it's really great to learn about the inner workings of the scholarship committee, both from the standpoint I was a student who received a scholarship, and also I'm a donor for scholarships as well. So it's great to see how all that is happening. And so we'd ask people to raise their hand to ask questions. If you go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a participants, click on that, and at the bottom of that window, you'll see a place. Oops, that's not there. Thought it was on there. But anyway, you'd be able to raise your hand for that. So first, Gretchen, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. The presentation was terrific, Esther, and I think the question of retention in the SEG community is a really good thing to examine as you review the program. I'm sitting here with my husband, Dave Cook, and the two of us were sort of in agreement that we question whether freshmen should be considered because they're so early in their career. But the other question that I wanted to raise is the recommendation criteria, and having recently gone through a couple of university recommendations where you're asked to say whether the person is the top 1% or 5% or 10%. I wonder about the inflation of people's characteristics, or is it just that the pool is sort of Lake Wobegon and everyone is above average? And I know that quantifying is kind of hard, but you know, I was in the position of recommending people who are very good, but probably not the top 1% of the universe. So I appreciate your comments about that.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the questions. For your first question, I can see your point there. Looking back on my personal story, I mean, I changed majors 5 times before I ended up in geophysics. So I understand that. I do think we more carefully review the freshman applications to see what their story is. You know, they're not just declaring a geophysics major, they're also providing an essay. We all know that can skew things in favor of good essay writers. I do think that we've been on the right track with reducing the number of accepted applications and also the number of recipients within the freshman category. And I would not be opposed to eliminating it entirely if I were asked, but that's definitely a discussion that would be happening, you know, amongst the board and the SEG staff. And I don't know if there's other implications of making such a decision. I'm sure there are. As for your second question, can you just give me a key word for that second question?
Top 1%, top 5%.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, how do we do that?
Right. Well, and I think that I've been happy to see the breakout between top 5% and top 1%. So I think we have top 1%, 5%, 10%, and then 25%. And I do think that it's possible that professors are inflating in order to, push forward their own students, but they also are writing a letter. And so we're reading that letter. And to me, the depth of that letter says a lot about the professor's involvement with the student. Whether you can read a lot based on how that letter is written and how strongly they feel about the student and what they are saying specifically about the merits of this student. And so I do think that statistic is helpful, but it's certainly not the only thing that any of us look at. And I certainly take it with a grain of salt in conjunction with the letter and how the letter is written and the sense I get from the professor who's writing the letter. So it's something that I look at, but it's not the end all and be all. And I certainly wouldn't rank someone number one just because of that, regardless of everything else. And I will say, there's many other things within the application, and all of us feel strongly about different inputs. So, for example, they describe their volunteer experience, any internships that they have, as well as their publications. And personally, especially for someone who's a graduate student in the geophysical realm, I think by that point they should be committing to volunteer activities. And so I look at that very strongly as well, because I think that's so important. And I think that should start when you're in grad school and be continued into your professional development. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I'm really, really impressed with what this committee does and your dedication. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, next, Lee, I saw your hand raised.
We go.
Lee, there you go.
Am I on? One thing I really liked about this program that you initiated here is seeing a lot of old friends, pictures up here in front of me. And I see Mary. Mary, can you see me? Good to see all these good people. The questions I had were the restricted scholarships. Initially, this program started with restricted scholarships. A lot of it was, and then we got lots of large company contributions and so forth, and so it built up to something really spectacular. But the restricted ones are the dedicated people. Usually, if someone gives a $10,000 or whatever scholarship size that we have now, they usually restrict it or are sort of encouraged to restrict it. You know what restricts or what, and they don't use the word restrictions, they just conditions. In other words, you got to be a U.S. citizen or belong, or better yet, a Texan, or I don't know whether there's any other restrictions on those. What percentage are restricted and what aren't? And maybe an example of the range of conditions that you have to deal with.
Yes,
Hello.
Thank you for the question. I would pass that off to one of the SEG staff who would care to answer the percentage that are restricted, because I honestly don't know that. Or I'll wait for them to.
Lee,
I'll
I'm
wait
gonna
for them to
Is the
chime in.
staff
On this
available?
question.
Yeah,
Leave
okay.
it. Yes, I am. Leave it to you to ask a question for which I don't have an immediate answer off the top of my head.
Oh,
But,
boy.
I promise you that I'll get you that statistic.
I don't need I don't need a real statistic, Mary. I'm talking about Mary Fleming now and her.
Well, I'll wait.
Was it
I'll
roughly
wait in
indicated
case.
on one of the graphs?
What?
If you go back and look at some of the graphs.
Oh, well, those.
I don't think any of those graphs are going to provide that data.
At least
I don't need that.
Yeah.
Let's start. Is
Yeah.
are half
Yeah,
of them
right.
restricted?
I'll rein this in.
I would say
and
at
I'll
least
say-
half.
Sorry. Yeah, I'd say half. is probably
Okay.
reasonable.
So-
And I understand what you're saying. And I would say, for an example of the range, one category might be a student who's doing geoelectrical methods. That's pretty broad, and there's probably several students, and that's an actual that are within that, and that we have several exceptional students who are doing geoelectrical methods. Or a student from a very specific university, I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, that typically has a small student body and a small number of applicants. So in the first case, there's likely to be several applicants that meet that description or fall within that category. And typically within that, some exceptional applicants that are on the merit-based ranking list, well-deserving of receiving the scholarships. In the second case, and please, Katie or Linda or Mallory, please stop me if I overstep any bounds or say anything incorrectly. In the second case, there's with a small student body and only one applicant, that person may or may not be high ranking on the merit-based list. If they're very low ranking, then do we award it? Is it the wish of the donor that be awarded regardless, or that money be retained and used in 2 or 3 years when a more well-ranking individual has applied for the scholarship, rather than just giving the money to the one person who has applied, who fits that narrow requirement? Did that answer your question, perhaps, or at least give you examples?
I had no idea that there was that range of conditions placed on the scholarships. The people who are soliciting these should probably counsel the donors not to get too definite, because of just exactly what you said there, that you may not be able to find a suitable individual. And so
Right.
anyway,
and I think when the category, my impression is when the category is very narrow, that the person has a specific reason. Maybe they graduated from that school and they really want to give back to a student who's following in that same path. So I just think the question should be very well considered as to whether, should it be awarded only in those years in which there is a serious applicant who's well ranked in the standings.
Yes. You know that most universities now, this is another, I'm sorry, can I ask 2 questions? Who's boss?
I don't
here?
know.
Go ahead, Lee. One short question.
One short, look what the beard just spoke. I can see him from now, man, and that person beside him there. I love this method. But anyway, what was I going to do? Oh, what were we talking? Now, skip me. I've lost what my conversation was going to be, and that shows you something. That's a symptomatic answer.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Next,
right,
I
thanks,
guess,
Lee.
then.
Mark Leonard, your hand was up next.
Yeah, I hate to even bring it up, but I was going to ask some about restrictions too. But since Lee went into this thing, has anybody tried to peel off these restrictions? Because all charities are dealing with the same thing. They got way too many restricted funds and they want to use the money for something else. So have we had anybody that's gone out and tried to reduce the restrictions?
So Esther, I'll take this if you'd like.
Okay. Yep.
So on the foundation side, the answer would be yes, Mark. We did a very large project back in 2010 where we contacted all of the previous scholarship endowment donors. And it was in an effort to make them aware of the new policy and procedures that the foundation had implemented to use an annual spending rate for payouts. But as part of that effort in connecting with all of them, I also talked to them about the restrictions that they had put on their scholarship awards. And in many cases, we were able to get the donors to add the restrictions as a preference, a first preference for the award, with the idea if there was no eligible applicants, that the scholarship committee then could give out the award to a recipient of their choice. And so moving forward since then, that has been our effort on the foundation side and working with our donors, because most donors, as you all know, the intent really is to help a student who is coming up through the geosciences. And so they may have a preference for a university or a certain type of major or something that the students are working on, but we do try our hardest on the foundation side to work with the donors so that the scholarship committee does have an easier consensus meeting to be able to give out those awards. But there are donors, of course, who are very strict about, wanting specific preferences, and those only being the preferences for their awards. So the foundation does have a gift acceptance committee. Any new scholarship endowments, which start at a $25,000 level, all of those commitments go through the gift acceptance committee, and they must agree that the award is broad enough to be able to be given. We also take into consideration when we have new endowments created, where we go back to the scholarship committee chair and also ask their guidance on making sure that the preferences that are being given for that award do make it more eligible every year to be given out. So there is work being done on the foundation side as well.
Good. It was a great presentation, Esther. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
All right, next, Lian Jing.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. And it's my great pleasure to be here to share my thoughts. So I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Houston, and this is my last year of PhD studying there. So I just want to share my experience on the questions if we should award the recipients continuously, like for several years. So so basically my story is that I was a recipient for 3 consecutive years for the SEG scholarship. So I benefit a lot from this scholarship, especially in the first 2 years. When I came here, I felt very secure in my financial. So I just felt I mostly need this scholarship in the first 2 years. And then later, I got support from my department and also get a scholarship. I also get internship from different companies. So financially, I'm getting better in the last several years. So I don't need that much for the scholarship. So I just stopped applying for a scholarship in the last several years. So I just want to say it really depends on the students who what is their situations. Maybe some students may be like very similar as my situation, so maybe they don't need that much in a scholarship in their later study of their PhD. So most of the times students who need the scholarships are in their first or second years, and then later maybe they don't need that. But for some students, maybe they still need the scholarship support in their study, especially for maybe master or undergrads, because they don't they won't get support from the department. Yeah.
Thanks, Lian. Yeah, and I'll say in my own case, I received a scholarship actually as a freshman starting out for my undergraduate, and I stayed with geophysics, so I guess it was a good investment for SEG for that. Louis Chabot, good to see you. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you all for having me, and thank you, Esther, for the presentation. Just for full disclosure, I've been a recipient of the SEG scholarship back in 2002, 2003, when I was doing my master's degree in geophysics at the University of Calgary. So that was awesome. And especially being Canadian and being paid in US dollar, let's put it that way, made even a bigger impact as a Canadian, receiving US dollar, let's put it that way. So the US dollar goes way further in Canada than I guess in your own country there. But I really want to thank you all. And I kind of, mentioned on links, I definitely appreciate when you do receive a scholarship, it makes a huge difference. It makes you part of a society. It makes you part of of a community. It kind of affirms your intuition, your passion for geophysics and geoscience. And I think really to have that, and even have it repeated again, it's just like having a double shot of espresso. You suddenly really like jumping up and down and working harder. So I want to thank you all for that. But my question is about the, as we all know, we're facing, transition energy or renewables. And I'm just curious in terms of the recipients, if they're mostly just oil and gas graduates or oil and gas, geophysicists that journey in the oil and gas journey, or there are also some of the recipients, because I don't think it was mentioned, are also into, say, geothermal or carbon capture storage or hydrogen or other fields of renewable. So I'm just curious if there's a, in the recipients, there's some form of, kind of focus to purely oil and gas careers in geophysics, or it covers other fields that, as we see around the corner in renewables and other fields. So that would be my question.
Yes, thank you. We definitely consider applicants outside the oil and gas field. We have several recipients and many applications within the near surface field, for example. I tend to pick up on those a little bit more because that's my realm. And similarly, it seems how you feel about renewables. I really feel the near surface community is exceptionally important for all the uncertainty we face in infrastructure development, climate, growing population, et cetera. So I definitely would say that application statistics would be skewed, I don't know them off the top of my head, towards oil and gas for the obvious reason that there are a lot of students pursuing this field headed or trying to head towards the oil and gas industry. But they definitely have the chance as applicants to explain in their application and then in their essay what their interests are. For example, we have people interested in earthquake seismic analysis as opposed to just seismic analysis, but opposed to seismic analysis for oil and gas exploration. So I don't have a statistic as for the breakdown, but that would be interesting to investigate. But I do see that there is a diversity in applicants that reflects the diversity in the field.
Thank you.
All right, Mike Loudon, you have a question?
Well, first I have a thank you for the committee. Esther, it amazes me that you have to be on this committee for 8 years. And Lori Bear has moved to India and she's still hooked in. The commitment that you all have made to making this such a success has been absolutely mind-boggling. And I just really want to express everybody's appreciation for what you all do. You were very complimentary about the donors, and you should be, and we all should be. But without you all to make sure that the scholarships are being given out in a very professional manner, which they are, is just so important. So that's the first part. Second part, so are there areas that you all wish people were focusing a bit more on? So if, I don't know what the answer would be, but more graduate student money, more upper class money. Is there any sort of grouping, if you will, of scholarships that we should be trying to seek more of?
Yeah, good question. First, thank you for your kind words. And Lori is a perfect example, I'll say, because we'll have calls like our fall committee meeting, and it's 11 o'clock at night in India, and she's there on the phone. So it's pretty amazing the dedication that everyone has to this committee. I think I can only answer your question from a personal perspective, and my personal preference, just me, obviously, would be targeting the master's level graduate students. I think as an undergraduate, maybe it's a bit early, although we have exceptional undergraduates in the program, to be trying to, foster someone's interest and them really knowing for sure that they are pursuing this path. And then I don't think you necessarily have to have a PhD to be, or obviously you don't have to have a PhD to be successful in this industry or in this field. So I think the middle ground there is students who have dedicated a little bit more time to trying to get into a master's program. Obviously, you have to be, there's a cut above demonstrated right there to get into a master's program. They have a area or project that they're interested in. And I think a master's, my opinion, just my opinion, is that a master's sets you up nicely for success. You've done a little bit more writing at that point. You've done some research, so you understand that aspect. But that's not an official answer. It's just my answer.
All right, thank you. Well, we're kind of coming up to the top of the hour here, so certainly understand if people have other commitments. But really want to thank you, Esther, for giving us some words about the Scholarship Committee and the great work you guys do. Yeah, I think the Scholarship Committee 8-year commitment must be about the longest commitment SEG asked for, except for maybe being president. That might be about it. But again, thank you, and thank you to all the donors who have helped provide the scholarships as well. Certainly would like you to have you continue that and continue support of the SEG Foundation. I and I think probably others will stay on the line here if there are other questions, maybe of a more general nature that you would like to ask. But certainly want to thank everybody for taking their time today to attend our virtual event. We'll try to have another one in the springtime. So thank you.
David, it looks like Anna has a question.
Oh, sure. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing this late, but there's a lot of talk about increasing diversity in the geosciences, and it sort of started, of course, with Black Lives Matter, but it's become a topic that we've seen a lot about. And I'm just curious whether there are scholarships to help those that are maybe somewhat marginalized.
Yeah, as far as I know, there are not any scholarship restrictions that are skewed in that direction. However, I do think Linda, am I wrong?
Well, you're not slightly, very, very, very slightly wrong. We have one scholarship for women in geoscience, so, and it's a very small scholarship. So you're almost right, Esther, but
almost right. You know what? I'll take it. Almost right. That sounds like a geophysical statement right there. So yeah, so there's that one. Thanks, Linda. And I do think that we have a wide range of successful recipients as far as nationalities and gender and interests, as I've mentioned. And I do think that my personal opinion is that the fundamental commitment towards scholarship awards should be merit-based. And within that, we certainly do see exceptional women coming up through the ranks, exceptional people from other nationalities coming up through the ranks. So I think that's all I have to say. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Rocky, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm not aware of any, but I'll just ask, do we actually ask scholarship winners to deliver anything back, any feedback back, like for instance, make a presentation, submit a summary of what they accomplished, or is it once the money is given, it's then
no, definitely
there are no requirements on them?
There are requirements, and you cut out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. And so, for example, there's a reporting requirement in the first of the year where reports are due from the students in February as an update on what they're doing. They have to verify that they've been accepted into the school. For example, we might have applicants who have applied to the school but not yet been accepted, or who decline, whose courses change path even within the few months that the committee is working on the awards, and then they have to decline their award. So there's definitely follow-up with the students, both from a documentation perspective with their reporting, as well as a personal perspective with the committee members. And I think that's very important. And I think the committee and the SEG staff are doing a good job of following up in that regard.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions or comments that people want to give here? Well, thank everybody.
I'll make a comment.
Okay,
I
Rocky.
will say, if somebody wants to endow a scholarship or do that, it's always clear they can go talk to Katie and that. But what I've never seen is a little brochure or anything that we pass out that says, hey, if you endow at this rate, this is what can be done. You know, something that we can, instead of being passive and letting donors who maybe want to do that come to us, that maybe we could be a little more active in across the membership.
Yes, Rocky, we can definitely make that happen.
Yeah, I feel like I'm reaching that age where the vultures are swirling and telling me about legacy gifts that I can give. And I believe that we now have people in the foundation who are ready to engage on legacy giving. So I'm just going to hide.
Yeah, it's either them or the government, right? So
I'm still too young for that.
Absolutely, Gretchen.
I need someone to tell me that.
Yep. Mary, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to, well, my dog has decided to interrupt me here. I just want to commend you guys on the scholarship program and the work that the scholarship committee does. It's an unbelievable workload, having participated only once in their full day final summation and a ranking. It's an awesome undertaking. And the program itself is staggering in terms of the impact. I don't know of another organization in the world that can equal what SEG has done with the scholarship program. Now, I haven't done extensive research on this, just in my relationships with the executive directors of the Science and Engineering Council. There wasn't anything that would even hold a candle to what SEG has done, and it grew historically out of the passion that the 1950s people had for supporting their profession. So I'm so proud of what SEG has done and the heritage that you're passing along, and it tickles my goozle to see that it's still flourishing. So it's a grand thing that you call this meeting together, and thank you for inviting me to participate.
Well, Mary, it's always good to see you. Yeah, you helped, well, you were leading the society then at that time as the executive director when we had our big campaign to really expand the endowment, and we got lots of good programs and scholarships started at that time. See a comment here from Leah that look at offering scholarships for minority and developing country students. The annual meeting is still largely not as diverse as we would like, and you know, is the geophysics profession changing in that respect? I know that certainly I think our total membership has been changing and evolving. We definitely were definitely a North America centric organization some 10 to 15 years ago, but we have, I believe, and Linda can probably correct me on that, have changed to less in that respect. But you're right, we need to look at it. And so maybe if Esther, you could comment on, you know, the international students, and are these international students going to North America universities or going to universities in Europe and other locations?
We have both, and I personally am involved with international students who are going to school internationally and doing some great work and some great research in those organizations and schools. And so I do think it's important to diversify, as you're talking about, and to make sure that we are including international students. But as you can see from the slideshow, well, I guess it's probably not up anymore. I'm not on the internet call now, but there is a significant amount of awards going to international applicants. And I'm going to pull that up myself right now and see if I can generate a statistic for you. But does that answer the question? Let's see, we had in 2020 to 2021, we had 71 North American recipients and 53 non-North American recipients. So that's a pretty amazing statistic from a diversification perspective.
I would add to that the male to female ratio is, female students, scholarship recipients usually runs about 25 to 30, if not more percent of the overall recipients, which is significantly higher than the same ratio in SEG membership.
Thanks, Linda.
But it's definitely something, we need to be encouraging geophysicists from wherever they may come from to stay with the profession. We need the good ones to stay. And it is probably a little bit more difficult for some of the, certainly non-North American students and perhaps other diverse students to get there. But remember too that the students actually have to self-identify on some of these scholarships. So we can't really ask the question necessarily. They have to self-identify. Well, I don't see any more hands raised. So wish everyone a great evening and a great holiday season, and please stay safe out there. It is great to see everyone this afternoon. I wish you all the best. Thank you for attending this virtual donor session. And remember, log on to SEG and donate to the foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.